Welcome, everyone, to the new Leadership Happens podcast. I'm super excited to have you all here today, and we're joined by LaSean Schmitt, who is the founder and CEO of Kagger Investments. Thanks for joining us, LaSean.
Hey, Ken. Hope you're doing well. I'm great. Great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to our conversation around leadership. And we really focus on our audience. Our audience is typically HR executives and CEOs and business owners and business leaders. And the goal is to talk to a wide variety of leaders from different backgrounds and different industries, and really allow our audience to have at least one kind of golden nugget takeaway of advice that they can apply to their own leadership style and approach with their team as well. And I'm sure we're going to unpack a lot of great stuff about your background and your experience in our conversation today. And I want to focus today's conversation around kind of driving your own career path towards leadership. I think, when you read things in the papers or you hear about the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, you think it's a linear, straight up approach from wherever you are
Right.
to leadership. But it's so different. We all know that it's just totally different out there. And most careers, myself included, are a bit more jagged than it is linear. And so we'll chat about that in our conversation today as well. So
Sounds great.
I want to start off with what I call the kind of the do-over and the do again, right? The lessons learned from leadership, and the do-over is, what is something that you wish you could do over, whether showing up in a specific situation in a different way, or maybe the way that you led your team through a particular, challenge or hardship. And then what's the do again? What are the things that you do again and again as a leader that really make an impact on your team? So let's start with the do-over. Anything come to mind there?
Yeah. Well, I'll kick off with saying, this anchor word leadership for me. Early in my career, I really couldn't decouple, and I just, this is just a personal flaw. I hadn't been educated, kind of people management from leadership. And I think it's a great reminder for us that many times you can, lead without authority, lead without directs. There's all sorts of ways that you can start to build your leadership skills. And so I call that out because I think some of the things I could have done over, I probably could have practiced much early on and didn't have to wait until, I kind of got into a more managerial role. But kind of to your core question on the do over, this one's very obvious. It's around the hiring process. I was very lazy, and I'm not embarrassed to say this. I got to kind of put the dirty laundry out there when it came to hiring. And what I mean by that, specifically two things. The first was the job description. I would phone it in. I'd go find one of my peers or one of our existing JDs, and I would just, I'd get it done. And it wasn't like they were poorly written from a grammatical or storytelling, but it didn't really do its job on both sides. One, it didn't filter out people who, once you got to an informational or an actual interview, that clearly would say, this isn't for me. And I could have done a much better job kind of calling that out. The second is, some entry level or task-based roles, they tend to be very process-driven. And then, knowledge worker roles tend to be, they're more ambiguous. And many times it's like, all right, here's a problem. You got to go figure that out. I don't really know the steps to tell you how to tackle this, but here's what you need to go do. And ideally, those are more kind of result oriented, with some type of time box, some metrics, and what have you. And I think sometimes either, at least for me, I was not being genuine. I was being lazy, not really thinking through for this individual, not, this one role that I've hired for many times that I can, hire for in my sleep. But let's talk about what we really need right now. What do I put in that responsibility section? What can I strip out of that qualification section, and just kind of really writing them as a bespoke one-off each time. That's something that once I started doing that, it really changed the quality of the candidates and the pipeline, because folks could understand. And I think on some level, folks could even see that this wasn't just a cookie cutter narrative. They're like, wow, this is really kind of sharing some things. And
Exactly,
I know
exactly.
for some startups and smaller companies, sometimes there's almost a fear to put too much in there because they know maybe competitors or others are kind of looking at the JD. That used to be one of the ways that, I would do competitive intelligence. I would go look at, I work in the software industry. I'd look at their technical documentation and I look at their job descriptions. And those two things would tell me more than their website or whatever their PR person was pushing. But anyway, just taking that job description seriously and not using it as simply this task that has to be completed in the recruitment process, but really kind of recentering and honing in on this being, kind of the document to start a relationship. And so that was the first thing I would say I would definitely do over. The second piece that's also part of the recruiting piece is just getting more serious about kind of my repeatable process for interviewing and increasing the volume as well. And so, when you're managing a team, you got a lot going on. It can feel like, oh my goodness, all of these folks I'm interviewing, so many of them are not going to make the cut. But I found that when I started getting serious about the process, and when I say process, like having a repeatable process, and I increased the volume, the kind of candidates that we got to hire, the quality was so much better.
Sure,
And
sure.
it's one of those things where you can feel like the pain of, oh my goodness, I don't have enough time to go do more of these interviews. But you're just going to feel that pain later on when you make a bad hire. And
Exactly.
so
Well, I think
those two,
both those things
yeah,
kind of come back to what you said as far as kind of being lazy, not lazy like I don't want to do this, but it's more kind of the convenience, right? Of
you're kind of
pulling out an
phoning it in
old,
because you got plenty
yeah.
else to do.
Right, exactly. And
Yeah.
it's done, especially in larger companies. I mean, you worked at Microsoft and Amazon and Motorola. At these big companies, especially, it's routine. It's the protocol to literally pull a job description off of the shelf. Time to refill this job again. Maybe you update a couple things here and there, but to your point, each job description and each interview should be treated as one-offs and very specific and customized in that regard, because it's
100%.
going to change. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, quick side hack that the places I've worked at large companies that I thought was really a great part of the process was at Amazon, where it was required that there be the actual term was bar raiser. And so, that term, the BR, is called out in many different functions at Amazon, but specific to the interviewing process, there's someone called a bar raiser. And that bar raiser was there to make sure the kind of interviewing process was followed properly. And this is someone who didn't work in HR, they didn't work in recruiting. I was in the product management and engineering group. So this was somebody who worked in that discipline. And very critical, they were not allowed to be part of the organization. So not only were they not in the hiring chain, they're just this random, other organization. And what was really powerful about that is you had this very objective person. They don't have a horse in the race on whether what problem you need to solve that needs this person hired. And so they really could, kind of, as they say, maintain the bar. And that process was never 100% perfect, but it was amazing in driving more consistency. And so the idea for folks who do potentially work at larger corporations, where they might be able to find their own version of that process to kind of pull in a more objective voice in the interviewing process, I found it very useful. And the reason it worked was we were all on the hook to do that. So I had to go, interview others in other groups as well. And so no one kind of got the drain without getting the payoff at some point down the road. So anyway, that's a little side hack
That's
that
really
I found to
powerful.
be
That's
very
amazing.
useful.
I've never heard of that. That's fantastic. You always hear about these goofy questions that Google and Microsoft ask questions about. So if you were stuck in a blender and you were one
Yeah,
in
those are there
five,
too. So
how
those
would you
aren't the
get out of
best.
that? Which I always think is kind of like, okay, I don't know, how's it going to really? Maybe it helps you hear as the interviewer how the person thinks. Okay, but I love that bar raiser. What a fantastic way. I mean, there's a great nugget of advice right there. That's something that we can all do, no matter what size company you're with. And you ran some pretty good sized teams of, I think, 100, 150 people, right? And
Right.
doing that on a regular basis, no matter what company you're at, is really going to raise that bar and keep everybody honest and on this and pulling in the same direction in the hiring process.
100%. And what I found was, and this took me a while to kind of be able to articulate it concisely. I typically budget my time on 50-hour work weeks. Some people want a 4-hour. I haven't quite figured out how to kind of make that work.
Me either.
But generally, that's kind of the time budget that I'm balancing. And I found that when I'm managing a direct team, if I'm spending less than 20% of that, about 10 hours of like real work, not, kind of the administrative stuff around it, focused on talent recruiting, hiring, like the whole process, there's probably going to be some health issues with my team. There's probably going to be something down the road that is going to come back to bite me if I'm not allocating at least 20%. And that just really shifted, because I used to look at it as a more reactive type of exercise, like, oh, we have these heads to fill. As I became more senior, I would become what they would call the as appropriate. So there'd be other folks doing the core interview, and then they'd bring me in at the end to kind of do one last pass, kind of inspect a few things. If they were really exceptional, they'd have me more in a sales kind of position, to like kind of close them. And but regardless of kind of where I would sit in that process, if I really wasn't thinking about our talent acquisition as a meaningful part of my week, I just found that the kind of overall health of the team suffered in other ways. And so it's just, to your point about the do-over, just really investing properly in the hiring process.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. As a reminder to our audience here, I know our audience can't see, but at least our audio audience can't see. But you are surrounded by books behind you. There are a gazillion. I can't even count all the books that are behind you on that bookshelf, which is great. So this idea of continuous education and how you drive yourself to leadership and how you get to that leadership point. It's not strictly through books, right? It's not strictly through education and a formal, college degree. A lot of it is through that life experience and kind of blending all those things together, which is why I love this conversation. And so moving on to then the do again. What are the things that you have learned, whether from the million books behind you, whether from your degrees that you've received or the companies you work for? What are the things that you repeat, that you do again and again as a leader, that has a positive impact on your team that you're leading?
Yeah, so there's a long list of these, and I probably would end the show just kind of rattling off all of these. But at a high level, for me, it's been trying to, really be empathetic and understand how other people may want to show up differently at work. I'm very systems oriented in my thinking, and so my brain just wants to like turn it into a framework, turn it into a repeatable process. Like I'm just always gravitating toward that piece. And I found that in the early days of my leadership opportunities, I was not so much a micromanager, but I was being overly prescriptive in the process. And I wasn't kind of giving folks space to kind of unlock and showcase, what made them unique and what they would bring to the table. And so to your specific question, again, I kind of break this out into two high level call outs, because again, there are many. The first is just creating an environment for psychological safety, where everybody really feels that I can say whatever, within societal reason. Don't come to work and start talking crazy. But I can really say anything, and there's no penalty if it's in service of our customer and the organization's values. And sometimes, and I don't know, maybe some of your audience has gone through this as well. I had worked early in my career, and I've done many things, but I worked in places where I had amazing managers, and others they're quite horrible. But I actually learned things on like what not to do from some of those bad managers. And one of them would be places where you're almost afraid to talk about your personal life. You're afraid to kind of really say what you're into. Everything is like it's almost like everyone's working scared straight, and it's just a horrible way to show up and try to get the best, especially if you're in an industry that is constantly being disrupted. I've worked primarily in the media and the technology industries, and those are industries where you can't do the same thing for 30 years and expect to be successful. And so through that lens, you have to get the best ideas, and this concept of like creating an environment of true psychological safety where people can be themselves, they can show up with their full selves, and they're not going to be penalized, not just for being themselves, but for getting things wrong, for failing, as long as it's tied to here's the lessons learned, here's how we document this, here's the process we're going to put in place to not do that again. those are the elements. And so that's the first big one that I just wish I had kind of learned that lesson earlier on.
That's
But
great.
once I got it, it's just been a staple in all of the teams that I've led, and it's been a huge unlock to kind of the value there. And then the other one that I stumbled on, so I can't take credit for this idea, but when I saw that it worked, I was like, oh, there's some magic here. Um, again, working in, and increasingly, many industries are being disrupted. And so I think we all have to think about, how the future looks like for whatever organization or industry we are in. But I would take non-traditional candidates, and there would always be, kind of these traditional candidates. Again, I'm going to kind of anchor in my world of software, but pretty commonly you'll have someone who maybe didn't go to college, and you have to go file some type of exception to get them through the HR process because they don't meet the bachelor's requirement. But they're just amazing. Like, you can look at their portfolio of work, their accomplishments. It's like, clearly this person is qualified. And then there would be other folks who had kind of gone through kind of the system, as I would say. These are folks who would be Ivy Leaguers. They would almost always have kind of a very similar kind of background. They would have a economics or computer science, undergrad. Then they'd have a kind of a comp sci or an MBA for grad school. In between, maybe they worked at one of the big consulting companies, or in a finance type role. And it was just like these cookie cutter journeys. And what I found was the non-traditional candidates tended to be, these are rules of thumb, obviously, always exceptions. They tended to be better problem solvers when the rules weren't clear. And they had generally a kind of stronger sense of courage, right? Whereas the folks who had gone through these kind of the Ivy Leaguers, these were like the smartest person in the room, throughout their whole kind of academic and early, professional life. But as soon as the rule book got thrown out the window, many times they were like frozen by indecision. They're like, well, what do I do? It's
Sure.
like, you got to go figure it out. And they're like, well, but what's the score? What's the test I take? Well, like, there's nothing. Like, you just have to go figure it out. However, the rigor at their ability to quickly digest things, to create systems around, how to, learn new topics, it was quite high. And so when I would combine the non-traditional candidates with these more traditional candidates, we ended up with teams where both were learning a ton from each other. And so that fusion by itself was very powerful, but we really had this diversity of thinking. And so, back to kind of the core point of, any industry that constantly gets disrupted, if you have that whole fusion, when the problem arises, someone in the group has the toolkit. And that was a really powerful thing that, again, I kind of stumbled on. But once I saw that it worked, it was really amazing. And it's also, I think, quite interesting to help people build these kind of lifelong professional friendships where, if you have a bunch of folks in a certain academic path who maybe don't interact with, someone who has a less traditional path, when you fuse them together, many of those folks have truly become lifelong friends. And so that's kind of a side benefit that I've seen out of there. But that idea of psychological safety paired with kind of diversity of team members has really been a huge unlock for the types of teams I've had to lead.
That's great. I love that. You touched on so many great topics there, and each one of those could be its own podcast. And in fact, I have, in the book that I wrote, The Practical Optimist, I talk about diversity of thought. I talk about, it's okay to be human, to your point earlier about showing
Yeah.
up to work not as a number on a spreadsheet, but as a whole human being, right? And being comfortable enough and having that feeling of psychological safety that you can show up that way, and you can have pictures of reasonable, but whatever you need in your cubicle or your office or what have you, you can talk about your kids and your family, talk about whatever is going on, and not just be solely in that title and bound to that particular job description, but again, being a full human being, which is fantastic. I love all those things that you touched on. Once again, we're joined today by LaSean Schmitt, who's the founder and CEO of Kagger Investments. Why don't you, LaSean, give us a quick kind of succinct idea and insight into what your firm does, what Kaggle does. Then I want to kind of circle back to a couple of things that you mentioned, but give us a quick snapshot on what you're doing today at Kaggle Investments.
Sure. Well, in short, I've looked at the explosion of audience-based marketing. Some folks would know that as organic marketing. If you think about how do you get customers for your business, I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but largely, it's through some type of advertising slash marketing campaign. It is through sales, or it is through organic marketing, where own channels such as social media or your website or other places are how you're attracting customers. And so those three channels, again, I'm simplifying intentionally. As I've looked at the cost structure around those, I'm less and less bullish that advertising is going to be the right path for all but some of the biggest companies. And so that kind of leaves, kind of direct sales and organic marketing. And I look at audience building as a form of leverage. And so I'm very bullish on this next generation of businesses, both consumer and enterprise slash business, that are kind of taking the playbook from social media, right? If you look back in the day, people would make fun of some of the big, kind of global mega influencers, like a Kim Kardashian. The kind of MBA class that you can take out of that is, those types of folks have figured out how to tap into this very scarce resource, which is our attention. And so the attention economy really is real, because, if I have minutes in the day, whether it's watching Netflix, playing a video game, talking to my family, reading a book, it doesn't really matter what it is. That is still the thing we have not figured out, how to give ourselves more of: time. And so I'm very, very bullish on, businesses and leaders who can figure out how to make audience core to their go-to-market strategy for their business. So that's the first pillar. And then the second pillar is automation. I stopped short of saying it's AI first, but it's really kind of looking at some of these new technologies, such as large language models, all sorts of kind of the pieces that have been kind of showing up over the last decade or so that really enable smart automation. And what I mean by that is, you could go back to the 50s or the 60s, and there were these folks who would walk around with clipboards, and they would do business process optimization, not business process outsourcing, which is the current label for BPO. But they would do this optimization, and they would say, all right, we got to make more of these Coca-Cola bottles in less time with higher yield. We don't want the bottles breaking, whatever. And they would find all of the steps in the process. They would document it. And then they would, this was analog, 50s and 60s. They would sit there with a stopwatch, and they would time them. And then they, time it enough times so they could average it out and like get some math. And then they'd go back to an office and they say, all right, here's the plan to go, make these bottles of Coca-Cola more efficiently. And that's been around for decades. And what I love about, these kind of tried and true pieces is we kind of just forgot about that. The PC revolution shows up in the 80s, the 90s, the web starts to take off, 2000s, at least the end of the 2000s, we get the cloud and mobile. And so folks kind of forgot about all of that process optimization stuff. And what I love about this AI wave is less about the AI tech, itself, but more that it's reminding people, all right, if you want to make use of this AI stuff, you got to understand what your process is. And it's making people go back to these kind of old tried and true methods to document their processes and their workflows, because then you can go identify, okay, where's their inefficiency? Where is there a piece of paper somebody could be digitizing this? Where's something we could outsource, to, some type of AI agent? But none of the stuff that's in the media really works until you understand your organization's processes. And so the kind of two key pillars for my business are, I buy and build companies that are powered by audience and automation. And that's my thesis. I'm kind of betting the next chapter of my career that those types of businesses are going to be able to outperform others, small or large.
That's great. I love that. And I think it's a great way to to kind of wrap together so many different things out there. One of which is, leadership, and what does leadership mean? You talked about, Kim Kardashian and any of the other big influencers. There's a great example of people that are leading. They may not be running a team. Maybe they have an entourage or whatever it might be, in her case especially. But there are different ways to lead, right? And different, examples, if you will, or instances of a leadership role, not necessarily with running a team, but just being impactful as well. I want to go back to a couple of things you said earlier on, actually, about career and kind of that the more diverse candidates out there, some that are non-traditional, that don't come from the same old, kind of track, and then some that do. I know in your career, you kind of started off non-traditional, right? You finished high school at 16, you got your first year AA at age 18, went into the military, you got several degrees after that, right? And then you began what could be seen in some respects as somewhat traditional, right? Joining the big companies out there.
Right.
Then you took a step back and started your own company. Then you went back into corporate again. So maybe talk about that leadership journey that you took, and maybe did you identify at some point along the way that you were starting to feel more like a leader and less like, kind of one of the worker bees, if you will, throughout that journey?
Yeah, well, I think two things kind of drove that. The first, and I won't give myself much credit, but there's one thing that I kind of gravitated towards as a pretty young, as a kid, that I just never let go of. And I'm sure it was part of my environment or, other folks who were kind of influencing me. But in short, I would describe it, as a phrase: most adults don't know what they're talking about. And as a very young, I'm talking 9, 10, 11 years old, like this was really embedded in my psyche. An adult would say something and I would just tell myself, I don't think that's true. And I don't know where I got, this kind of feeling that I wanted to challenge, this thinking. And it wasn't like they're wrong on purpose, right? I didn't think like these adults are trying to lead us astray. I was just, I was like, did they really do the work? Right. And there was just always some weird spidey sense that I had that was like, don't trust these adults. And now, as someone who has been, working for a while, and as I mentor and coach, younger people, I give them the same advice. Like, I'm one of the adults. Don't listen to us. Like take the anecdotes, take these pieces, but don't just try to carve out a path and just kind of follow us, step by step. And the world changes as well, so that's not always a great plan. But that's the first thing, and I think because of that, I never felt that I needed to really overvalue the current position I was in, right? And I would constantly get to a stage in my career, and someone would say, "All right, now you're on the right path, and just stick to this." And when it stopped being fun, when I felt like I wasn't learning, when things didn't feel like they were going right, it was very clear to me that I should go do something else. And fighting the fear that we can sometimes build up that says like, I think I should just stick to what's working right now. I don't think I should quit this job. I don't think I should. I mean, I've left industries. I've left. I've been. I started as a software engineer doing web application development. Then I went to design, then product management, and it was just like, this dude is so random. But mostly it was just, I like to say, I've been tasting life's buffet, but mostly it's just not looking at the current position and saying this has to be it, and just be willing to go look at other things. And because of that, I've gotten these opportunities to be exposed from great leadership qualities in very different contexts. So how leadership is run in the military versus on a film set versus, building software. These are very different ways that people have to bring people together. Now, the common thread is in almost every case, there is a multidisciplinary set of folks who maybe are motivated by different things or different stages of the career. And so you got to figure out how to get everybody on the same page, on the same mission, even though, they might be showing up for different reasons. And so that first piece of, kind of not being not being kind of focused and listening to the adults, that's been very powerful in my journey to give me the exposure. Now, kind of to the root of your question, I think I just got lucky and chose something that I really got excited about, which was technology, and it turned out to be a rocket ship. And as things went on, just the compensation for being, kind of a corporate worker in the technology world, it was just kind of almost too good to be true what they were paying us, at certain points in my career. And so just kind of silly not to do it. I look at, kind of where I'm at financially and other types of things. And I many times catch myself and make sure I don't try to give advice like, let me show you how I did it. Really, I just got lucky, right? Like I'll say that I picked my passion, right? I went and, kind of towards something that I really was energized about. But there's no way that, I could look back honestly and say, I strategically picked the path that was going to lead me to financial independence early in my, like, no, like I just got lucky. And so the main things, themes that I pull out, that I do think can be extrapolated and folks can take from is, looking at your career as kind of this buffet is option A, and giving yourself the permission to just kind of move around. That is an option. And you have to think about your values, your responsibilities, all those types of things if you're going to take on more of that risk. But I think there's near unlimited upside if you consider that path. And then the other path is just kind of committing to a path and letting consistency just kind of take over. And you're really over the years going to master a certain discipline or industry. And where I find the danger is folks who are like swimming in the middle. They're hot and cold. They're not picking one of these paths.
Yeah,
I really
not really
believe
committal. Yeah.
Yeah. These extremes are where most people are going to find their success. And we all know ourselves. There's probably one path that's better than the other. But that middle path, I think, is, people stay at a job a little too long and then they leave when they finally get frustrated. And it's like, no, pick a plan, think in decades, not years. And I think you'll be in a better place.
For sure, for sure. And I think, I know you're obviously very humble. I think it's a little bit more than just luck. Certainly you had the mindset to do what you've done and you had the passion for it. But I also think that you had a certain level of risk tolerance, right? And combined with self-awareness that allowed you to put yourself in situations and be exposed to opportunities that you took. And then that's where that luck came from, right? You chose industries and a path within a sector or several sectors that really was, like you said, a rocket ship. But that self-awareness to say, hey, I don't have to stay here and just pick the easy path. Yes, it'd be nice to make X amount of dollars consistently over the next 20 years and then retire and that's it. But we all know that's just kind of waiting around for your career to happen to you versus being
Right.
more self-aware and knowing where your passions are and what you want to do longer term as well.